I used to believe that marriage was built on trust. Then I married Ethan Lawson. To the outside world, we were the picture of success, the glossy magazine version of love. Ethan, the charming CEO of a rising tech firm, and me, Emily Lawson, the quiet marketing strategist who supported her husband's dream. That's what everyone said at dinner parties, in interviews, in the photos that ended up on LinkedIn and lifestyle blogs. But the truth? I wasn't supporting his dream. I was building it. Every pitch deck he presented, I designed. Every investor contact came through my network. The product name that made his company go viral, NimbusNet? Mine. The logo that now sits on a 30-story glass building downtown? Also mine. But on paper, I was just the wife. For years, I told myself it didn't matter. Love isn't a competition, I'd think. What's his is ours. That's how we started, with shared ambition and late nights on cheap takeout. Planning a future neither of us thought would come true so quickly. Until it did. NimbusNet exploded. Within 3 years, it went from a garage startup to a $70 million valuation. Journalists called Ethan the visionary. I was always his lovely wife. I didn't mind, not at first. Because every time I looked at him, I saw the man who used to make coffee runs at 2 a.m. The man who once told me, "We'll make it together." But together started to fade once money entered the picture. Ethan became sharper. Polished. He traded his soft smile for a boardroom grin and his late-night sketches for luxury suits. He'd come home later and later, smelling like expensive whiskey and ambition. And then, one night, I found the first crack. It was almost midnight. He'd fallen asleep on the couch, laptop open, screen glowing in the dark. I leaned over to close it, and that's when I saw the email. Subject line, "Transfer completed, Cayman account." The amount, $2.5 million. I froze. My pulse stuttered. The message was addressed to a private banker, not his accountant, not his firm. My name wasn't anywhere in it. I copied the email to myself, heart pounding, then shut the laptop quietly. 4 days, I didn't confront him. I watched. I waited. Every small detail I'd ignored before began to connect: the new phone he wouldn't let me touch, the trips to meet investors in the Bahamas, the sudden shift to separate credit cards. Ethan wasn't just changing, he was preparing. A month later, I found the second clue: a conversation on speakerphone he didn't realize I could hear. Yeah, he was saying, "The trust will be finalized before the filing. She'll get her share, but not everything. That's the point. Her share." I stood in the hallway, clutching the wall, trying not to breathe too loud. Filing. He was talking about a divorce, one he hadn't told me about yet. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, counting the years I'd poured into his empire, and realized something cruel. Ethan didn't just plan to leave me. He planned to erase me. The next morning, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, Rachel Porter, my old college roommate and now one of the best forensic accountants in Seattle. I didn't tell her everything over the phone. Just enough. "I think my husband's hiding money," I said. Her voice went quiet. "How much?" $22 million, I whispered. There was a pause. Then, "Send me everything you have." By the end of that week, Rachel had access to every shared account, every corporate filing, every payment trail. I didn't ask how she'd always been good at getting past locked doors. And what she found made my stomach twist. 5 offshore accounts, 2 shell corporations registered in Belize, and 1 trust discreetly labeled under a parent company Ethan had created without my signature. Every dollar he'd ever promised we'd invest together had been siphoned away in silence. I sat at my desk, staring at the numbers. 22 million. Hidden. Moved. Protected. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I felt something else, not grief. Not panic. Clarity. He thought he was outsmarting me. He thought I was still the quiet wife with the polite smile and the soft words. But what he didn't realize was that I'd learned everything from him. That night, I poured a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and began creating a file labeled NimbusNet Holdings Audit Backup. Inside it, I saved copies of every transaction, every offshore statement, and every line that tied his company's success to mine. Because if Ethan Lawson wanted a war, He was about to find out that the quiet wife he underestimated was also the strategist who built his empire. And I never lose at my own game. I woke up before dawn. Ethan was still asleep beside me, his breathing deep, his arm draped lazily across the blanket like a man who had never known consequence. The city outside our window was still and gray, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like it's waiting for something to break. I got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen island with my laptop open. The smell of coffee filled the air, bitter and grounding. Every trace of warmth I'd once felt toward him had evaporated, replaced by a cold, steady focus. The kind I used to have before I started letting love make me smaller. By 7 a.m., Rachel had already emailed me. Her name flashed on my screen like a signal flare. Subject: confirmed trust structure found. Body: he's hiding assets through LWS Consulting, registered in Belize. That's the shell. It owns Nimbus IP Holdings, which holds all company trademarks. He's not just hiding money, Emily. He's trying to take the company's foundation offshore. I stared at the email until my coffee went cold. My hands trembled, not from fear but fury. That man was preparing to vanish, leaving me with nothing but the shell of a marriage and the ghost of a company I'd built with my own hands. I wrote back 2 words: document everything. I went to my office and pulled out the leather briefcase I hadn't touched in years. It still smelled faintly of ambition. I filled it with proof bank statements, screenshots, copies of every design I had created, every contract I had written, every trace of my work that had made NimbusNet what it was. If he wanted a war, I would fight one. But not with anger. With evidence. When Ethan finally came downstairs, I was dressed for work, blazer sharp, hair pinned, face calm. He smiled like nothing was wrong. "Morning, Em," he said, stretching. "You're up early." "Busy day," I said flatly. He poured his coffee, leaned against the counter, studying me with that patronizing half grin I used to mistake for charm. "You've been working a lot lately," he said. "Almost like you're running a company." I am," I said. "You just don't know which one yet." He laughed, shaking his head. "You've always had that sense of humor." He walked away, still smiling. I waited until I heard the door close behind him before letting my face drop back into its real shape, focused, calm, unflinching. At noon, I met Rachel at a small cafe downtown. The place was noisy, the perfect cover. She looked at me with a mix of concern and admiration. "You were right," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "He's moved $22.4 million into offshore accounts. But that's not the worst of it." "What's worse than 22 million?" I asked quietly. She leaned in. "He used NimbusNet funds for some of the transfers. He's mixed personal assets with corporate accounts. That's fraud, Emily. If we prove this, the company is legally yours." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My heartbeat felt like thunder under my skin. "He used the company to hide money." Rachel nodded. "Yes. You don't need to chase the money. You just need to let the company audit itself. He'll dig his own grave, trying to cover the trail." I stared at her, and then a slow, steady smile broke across my face. "Then let's give him a shovel." That night, Ethan said he was flying to New York for investor meetings. I already knew where he was going, his banker's office in Manhattan. I kissed him goodbye at the door, the same way I always did, and watched his car disappear down the street. When the house was silent, I walked into his office. His laptop was still warm. His safe sat behind the bookshelf, like always. I'd watched him open it hundreds of times. 6295. Our anniversary. I punched it in, and the lock clicked open. Inside was a manila envelope labeled Trust Agreement LWS Consulting. My stomach tightened as I flipped it open. The first page listed 2 beneficiaries, Ethan Lawson and primary business partner, undisclosed. But I recognized the signature immediately. Jason Moore. His lawyer. My pulse slowed, my breathing even. He wasn't just hiding money. He was preparing to sell the company, my company, to his lawyer for $1 before filing for divorce. I scanned every page, sent them to my email, and put the folder back exactly where I found it. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the dark, staring at the city lights outside. My reflection in the window looked calm. But my hands were steady because the plan was forming. At 3 a.m., I sent everything to Caroline Ross, an attorney I'd worked with years ago. Her reply came minutes later. Emily, this is airtight. Don't confront him. We'll let the court handle it. Discovery will expose everything. Stay calm. I whispered the words out loud. Stay calm. When Ethan returned from his trip, I was the perfect wife again. Dinner waiting. Smile ready. Voice soft. He didn't notice that every glance I gave him was memorizing his downfall. He didn't notice that his queen had already trapped his king. 2 weeks later, a courier delivered an envelope. Divorce papers. His handwriting at the bottom of the cover letter. You'll be taken care of, he wrote. I laughed. I actually laughed. The arrogance was almost poetic. He thought he'd already won. He thought I'd cry, beg, fall apart. But I just signed the papers, the ink drying like a quiet promise. Within days, discovery began. Caroline filed every document. Rachel had gathered the offshore accounts, the trust, the forged transfers. Ethan's own lawyer's name was on the fraudulent paperwork. When the hearing started, he tried to keep his composure, but the cracks showed. Caroline laid out the evidence like a surgeon. Mr. Lawson, she said calmly, can you explain why company funds appear in private offshore accounts under your name? Ethan swallowed, stammered. Those were business expenses. Then why, she continued, flipping the page, were those same accounts registered under a private trust co-signed by your attorney? Silence. The judge's gaze hardened. Mr. Lawson, are you aware this constitutes concealment of marital assets? His mouth opened, but no words came out. For once, the man who had built his entire life on confidence had nothing left to say. When it was over, the courtroom was still. Reporters whispered. His lawyer looked sick. Ethan turned toward me, his voice barely audible. Emily. Please. I stood, gathered my papers, and looked him in the eye. You told me once that business is about leverage, I said. I just learned from the best. I walked out without looking back. The flashbulbs outside the courthouse felt like lightning. Reporters called my name, but I didn't stop. My heels clicked against the marble floor, steady and deliberate. In the car, I took off my wedding ring and set it beside me. The metal glinted once under the sun before I closed my fist. It wasn't anger I felt. It wasn't even triumph. It was peace, the kind that comes when the truth finally catches up to the lies. He thought he'd buried $22 million. He didn't realize he'd buried his future. The day of the final hearing, the air in the courtroom felt heavy, almost metallic, like the world itself was holding its breath. Ethan sat across the aisle, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. His jaw was tight, his tie slightly askew, a small imperfection, but for a man like him, it was a crack in the armor. I didn't look away. I wanted him to feel it, the gaze of the woman he'd underestimated, the one he thought would crumble quietly. The judge entered, his robe flowing like a curtain between justice and guilt. We'll resume Lawson versus Lawson, he said. My attorney, Caroline, rose with calm precision. Your Honor, before we continue, she said, we've submitted additional discovery emails, wire transfers, and a trust agreement signed by Mr. Lawson and his legal partner, Mr. Moore. Ethan's lawyer jumped up immediately. Your Honor, these documents were obtained. The judge lifted a hand. They were obtained through subpoena, Mr. Reed. Please, sit down. The room fell silent. Caroline continued, her voice smooth and sharp as glass. As these records show, Mr. Lawson diverted company funds totaling $22 million into offshore accounts over a period of 14 months. These funds were concealed during the dissolution process and linked to shell companies owned by him and his attorney. The judge's expression didn't change, but the energy in the room shifted. A quiet ripple moved through the courtroom. Ethan leaned forward, trying to interrupt. That's not true. Those accounts were part of your deception. Caroline cut in. Because the Belize filings list NimbusNet's corporate earnings as personal deposits. You signed those transfers, Mr. Lawson. She slid a document forward. With this pen. Ethan froze. It was the Mont Blanc I had given him on our second anniversary, the one engraved with E.L. He stared at it like it might explain itself. The judge looked down at the paper, then at Ethan. "Mr. Lawson, is that your signature?" He hesitated for half a second too long. "It is," he said finally, voice cracking. "Then this court finds your concealment of assets intentional and fraudulent." The words hit the room like thunder. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Lawson, all hidden marital assets, including NimbusNet corporate holdings, will transfer to your name effective immediately. Additionally, restitution will be calculated and enforced through sale of any remaining personal assets." Caroline's hand brushed my arm, subtle but steady. "You did it," she whispered. Ethan slumped back into his chair, eyes hollow. For once, there was no charm, no smile, just silence. He mouthed something across the aisle, maybe an apology, maybe another excuse. I didn't care enough to read his lips. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. "Mrs. Lawson. Emily. Did you know about the offshore accounts? Is it true you own NimbusNet now? Will you change the company's name?" I kept walking. My heels echoed against the marble, the sound clean and deliberate. I didn't answer a single question. They didn't deserve the story, not yet. Later that evening, I drove to the office building that bore the name I'd once helped design. NimbusNet Tower. The glass shimmered against the fading light, tall and arrogant. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, watching the reflection of the city ripple across its windows. Somewhere in one of those offices, Ethan's name was still engraved on a door. Not for long. Inside, the security guard recognized me and smiled. "Mrs. Lawson, congratulations," he said softly. "They said you'd be taking over." I nodded. "Starting tonight." I took the elevator up to the top floor. The sound of the elevator doors sliding open echoed through the lobby, familiar, almost haunting. Ethan's office was unlocked, half empty already. The desk was bare except for a framed photo of us smiling, younger, unaware of how fragile happiness can be. I picked it up, stared at it for a long moment, then set it face down. Behind the desk was the company crest, gold lettering that spelled NimbusNet Technologies. I ran my fingers over the edge of it. My design. My idea. The one he'd once laughed at, calling it too poetic for tech. I took out my phone and called Caroline. "It's done?" she asked. "It's done," I said. "I want the name change paperwork filed first thing tomorrow." "To what?" I smiled. "Alara." "Alara?" "My middle name," I said. The one he always forgot. The next morning, every employee at NimbusNet received an internal memo. Effective immediately, NimbusNet Technologies will operate under a new name, Alara Systems. That day, Ethan's portrait was taken down from the lobby. My photo replaced it, simple, professional, no smile. I didn't want triumph. I wanted truth. When I walked through the halls later, people whispered. Some smiled, others avoided my eyes, unsure if I'd be merciful or meticulous. The truth was, I didn't plan to fire anyone. They hadn't betrayed me. He had. In the afternoon, I went into the boardroom. The same room where Ethan once said, "You're just not leadership material, Emily. You're better behind the scenes." Now, I stood at the head of the table, the seat he'd once claimed was his by nature. I looked around at the faces of executives who had followed him blindly. "From now on," I said, "this company runs on transparency. No lies. No shell games. No more arrogance disguised as vision." There was a long pause. Then applause, cautious at first, then building. As they left the room one by one, I stood alone by the window. The city glowed beneath me, endless and alive. My reflection stared back, sharp and calm, no longer the quiet woman who played the supporting role. Ethan had built his empire on deceit. I rebuilt it on truth. And the truth, I realized, is the most expensive weapon in the world. When I left the office that night, I passed by the front doors where his old nameplate had been removed. The metal left a faint outline on the wall, a shadow of a man who once thought he was untouchable. I touched the cool glass of the door before stepping outside. The air smelled like rain. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like running from anything. Because I had already won. The next morning, the headlines spread like wildfire. Wife exposes CEO in $22M fraud scandal. Every news outlet carried Ethan's name, every photo captured his downfall, the polished millionaire turned disgraced executive. But none of them mentioned me by name. Just, the ex-wife. And strangely, that anonymity felt powerful. Let him carry the weight of recognition. I would carry the freedom of silence. By noon, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Former investors, board members, old colleagues all suddenly remembering I existed. "Emily, we always knew you were the real strategist," one said. "If you ever start something new, count me in." I smiled to myself. They hadn't always known. They'd just finally been forced to see. Later that week, I walked through the now renamed Elara Systems building. The logo gleamed across the lobby wall, soft silver letters, clean and elegant. My middle name. My company. My legacy. Employees greeted me with quiet respect, the kind people reserve for someone who survived a fire and still walked out standing. In Ethan's old office, the furniture had been replaced. The air smelled faintly of cedar and new beginnings. On the desk sat a single file folder, the company's final court transfer documents. Signed, sealed, stamped. Everything he built. Everything he hid, now legally mine. I sat in his old chair, turned it toward the window, and stared down at the city below. The skyline looked different now. Brighter. Honest. That afternoon, Caroline came by to finalize the paperwork. "You've officially taken ownership of NimbusNet's parent assets," she said, placing the last page in front of me. "It's all over, Emily." I nodded slowly. "No," I said softly. "It's just beginning." Caroline smiled. "You're going to do good things with it. I'm going to do honest things with it." After she left, I stayed in the office long after dark. The city outside pulsed with life, cars, lights, people moving through their own stories. I opened Ethan's last email, sent weeks before the final hearing. It was short, desperate, and unread until now. "You win, Emily. Take everything. Just tell me how you could do this to someone you loved." I stared at it for a long time, then typed a single reply. "I didn't do it to you. I did it for me." Then I hit delete. 6 months later, Elara Systems was the fastest growing tech firm on the West Coast. The same board members who once sided with Ethan now praised my leadership. The irony never escaped me. But I didn't build this empire for revenge anymore, not really. I built it for every woman who'd ever been told she was replaceable. For every partner who'd been erased in silence. During the grand reopening event, I stood on stage, the company's new logo glowing behind me. Cameras flashed, applause echoed, but I kept my speech short. "When someone underestimates you," I said, "don't argue. Just outlast them." The crowd erupted, but I hardly heard it. I thought of the nights I'd sat alone, staring at contracts, tracing numbers like they were lifelines. I thought of Ethan, laughing across dinner tables, certain he'd always have the last word. And I thought of the quiet moment in court when the judge handed me back my future, one signature at a time. After the event, I slipped away from the crowd, up to the rooftop terrace where the city stretched endlessly in every direction. The wind tugged at my hair, cool and alive. Below, the building lights formed a reflection of my initials E.L., shining on the glass facade. Some victories don't come with cheers. They come with silence. With peace. With knowing that you've rebuilt yourself stronger than the storm that tried to bury you. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old wedding ring. For a second, I turned it over in my palm, watching it catch the light. Then I walked to the edge and let it fall, a tiny glint disappearing into the dark below. That part of my life was over. As I stood there, the city humming beneath my feet, I realized something I'd never truly believed before. Success wasn't the revenge, peace was. And I had both. I stood there for a long moment, watching the ring vanish into the city lights below, a small, silent piece of the past swallowed by the night. The sound of it landing never reached me. Maybe that was the point. Some closures don't make noise, they just end quietly, like a door finally clicking shut. The rooftop was cool and calm, the city breathing below. The wind carrying the faint echo of sirens and laughter, the sounds of a world that kept turning no matter who fell or rose. I breathed it in, steady and sure. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone's wife, someone's assistant, someone's shadow. I was just Emily Lawson, and that name finally meant something again. When I turned back toward the glass doors, the reflection that met me wasn't the woman Ethan had tried to silence. It was the woman who learned to weaponize silence. The one who smiled at her own reflection not because she had won against someone, but because she had won herself back. The next morning, Elara Systems' front page ad ran in the Wall Street Journal. Integrity is the future. My quote beneath it read, "The truth doesn't destroy empires. Lies do." Ethan called that day. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, his voice calm, almost broken. "You were always better at this than me," he said. "I just didn't see it." I listened once, then deleted it. There was no satisfaction, no anger left. Only stillness. The kind of peace that comes when you finally let go of the need to explain yourself. Later that week, Caroline stopped by my office with champagne. "You did it," she said. "From the courtroom to the boardroom, you walked out on top." I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "I walked out free." We clinked glasses. The bubbles fizzed, delicate and fleeting, just like everything I used to chase. That evening, as the office emptied out, I stood by the window. Again. The city shimmered, endless, and alive. Somewhere out there, Ethan was learning what life felt like without control. I didn't hate him for it. I didn't love him either. He had simply become part of the story that built me. I opened my laptop, scrolling through the day's numbers, profits, new clients, messages from investors. But what caught my eye wasn't the data. It was the message Rachel had sent hours earlier. "They're calling you the woman who rewrote the ending." I laughed quietly to myself. "No," I whispered. "I just stopped letting someone else write it." When I finally shut down the computer, the reflection of the Elara Systems logo glowed faintly against the window pane. Beneath it, my own reflection, calm, composed, complete. I turned off the lights and walked toward the elevator. The sound of my heels echoed through the empty hallway, every step steady, measured, final. The elevator doors slid open, and I caught one last glimpse of the skyline. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It never really had been. It was about truth. About building something that couldn't be taken, hidden, or stolen. The doors closed, and I smiled small, certain, unstoppable. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't winning back what was stolen. It's showing the world you never needed it to begin with.